Well, here it is, if anybody wants to see it.
Are you there addressing yourself purely to technique in the cinema and exploring and almost cinematically having a kind of experimental fun, or is there any content meaning in a sequence like that?
To me, there is no much difference between content and form. I mean, you can reach content through forms, and you can reach forms through content. You need both, but you need a move from one to another. Only forms, then it becomes an advertising business, or only content is not good. Is not good either, because you miss. Because the human body is a form, and this form has a content like an envelope as a letter. Without the envelope, you can never send the letter.
Like me because of who I like. I'm not really a big fan of Jean-Luc Godard anymore. I think, I think Godard is a little bit like a Frank Frazetta. You kind of like, you get into him for a while, and he's like your hero for a little bit, and you start drawing shit like him, and then you kind of outgrow him. I think that's kind of what Godard is for at least for me anyway, as a filmmaker.
Well, here it is, if anybody wants to see it.
The idea was to have in this section of the film to replay the film and then to just add my commentary on it as a kind of pseudo commentary track. There was a queer short film I saw a few years ago on Mubi. I forgot the name of it for the life of me. I actually forgot the name of it. Whether it was a queer director about a queer film where they're stuck in the woods. It's just two, I think, actors, and the director of the film comments on the film itself. And it only struck me that this was similar to that after I already came up with the idea. So in a way, I came up with this idea of the commentary track, independent, really, of that film, even though that film predates this one, basically. It doesn't really matter because I came up with it independently, on my own, so to speak. Even if I saw it before, it doesn't count. I think one of the points of a commentary track is to you give an alternative perspective, on the production or the history or the theory or a critique of the film from the perspective of the person who's giving the commentary. And what I look for in the commentaries, I learn from my commentaries. I don't know what you would learn from listening to this, to be honest, because I don't plan. Because my worry or my fear is being found out to just be pretentious.
Nothing is so terrible as a pretentious movie. I mean, a movie that aspires for something really terrific and doesn't pull it off is shit, it's scum. And everyone will walk on it as such. And that's why poor filmmakers, in a way, that's their greatest horror, is to be pretentious. So here you are, on one hand, is trying to aspire to really do something. On the other hand, you're not allowed to be pretentious. And finally you say, fuck it. I don't care if I'm pretentious or not pretentious, or if I've done it or I haven't done it. All I know is that I am going to see this movie. And that for me, it has to have some answers. And by answers, I don't mean just a punchline. Answers on about 47 different levels. And it's very hard to talk about these things without being very corny. You use a word like self-purgation or epiphany, they think you're either a religious weirdo or an asshole college professor. But those are the words for the process, this transmutation, this renaissance, this rebirth, which is the basis of all life.
The idea that I had basically going into the film, one of the ideas that I had basically was to find a series of images and sounds and clips that I could glean together and gleam these images into kind of one cohesive unit. Almost kind of like a what would you call it, like one of those oral history books that you would read, you would take from different sources and different interviews and put them into one kind of cohesive idea. And that was one of the ideas that I had going into it, from a stylistic perspective. Whether or not it works is a completely different, well, I mean, that's just a different question, but the idea was to glean the image.
Mais moi aussi je glane, alors je glane aussi des images pour faire mon film.
And even then, I mean, I understand why you have to understand why you would want to experiment or do something more experimental in the first place. Because there's, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of directors, whether you're an artist or a painter or a musician, you go into the art form thinking, already being acutely aware of the people who have come before you, and being acutely aware of the canon, so to speak. And I think, David Bordwell, who's a film critic, film theorist, spoke about in a book, The Way Hollywood Tells It, I remember, where he talks about the directors who had come in the 1960s had a challenge to that. There was already this established canon, all these great directors and all these great movies that had already been made. And the challenge now was, what do you do knowing about all of those other films that have been made? What can you add that's different from them? And how do you kind of find, not necessarily find your voice, but something new? And how do you create a great film amongst all these other great classics that already exist? I mean, I remember there was this one quote from, I think, the early 60s, where Peter Bogdanovich had said, and this was early 1960s, 1960, 1963, when he said, all of the great American films have already been made. And like, to some extent, that's true. All of the great American films had already been made, and all of the great films internationally had already been made. So then what do you do now? And then now, what they did, I think a lot of they did, they set the canon and they quoted it. And by quoting it, I think they made it themselves a part of the canon, in a way. That's just rambling on my part. But now, you have past Bogdanovich, past Altman, past all these people, and then you have the people established after those people, the Coens, the Tarantinos, the Nolans, the Andersons. And then what do you do now in that moment, post that moment, and post that moment, in the modern to the postmodern to the postmodern? Wow, what do you do? And where do you find that kind of new space to inhabit? And for me, finding that is reaching into, I'm trying to find that through experimental aspects, through experimental places, and not just to experiment for experiment's sake, but to experiment and to play with form, and even more than that, to actually then say something with form, to draw some kind of meaning from how the sounds and images are collected and gleaned through a sequence. But I am being sincere. I am being sincere, and I'm trying to not be afraid of seeming pretentious. I mean, in the Coppola quote, I veer off when you say, I mean, the last thing an artist would want to be is pretentious. I'm trying to let go of that. I'm trying to not be afraid of seeming or looking pretentious, and kind of leaving that at the door, and just kind of trying to be sincere in myself, and just trying to be honest, really. Because I don't know what else to do. I can't say even that this film is like a great film. I mean, I've seen other short films by people around my age. Um, by people around my age, even if I look at a lot of the Filipino cinema that's happening right now. I just saw a film, a set of Filipino films. For instance, I saw Ticket by this Gabriela Serrano, who's I think around the same age as me, and I think has just made it's just a wonderful short film. And she only has one, but I think it's great, and I can't really pretend like mine is as great as that, really. But I can be honest and say, well, I'm being sincere. And I think, of course, she's being sincere. And a lot of, those Filipino directors, I'm blanking on them right now, are being sincere. And a lot of other people are being sincere. I can only really be sincere. And I'm not going to be afraid to be pretentious. So, that's just kind of where I'm. But in any way, I don't even know if what I'm saying is being coherent or just rambling. I think it's more rambling on my part. But I'm willing to sacrifice coherence for a kind of a free flowing of what I think and being open and vulnerable, I think.
To me, there is no much difference between content and form. I mean, you can reach content through forms, and you can reach forms through content. You need both, but you need a move from one to another. Only forms, then it becomes an advertising business, or only content is not good. Is not good either, because you miss. Because the human body is a form, and this form as a content, like an envelope as a letter. Without the envelope, you can never send the letter.